Carl Mather. The shills and the idiots don't like to talk about Carl Mather, and neither did the Warren Commission, because to understand this issue of Carl Mather and his license plate is to realize that the assassination was a conspiracy and an inside job. So, of course, they don't want to understand it, and they don't want you to understand it. But Carl Mather was a friend of J.D. Tippit, the police officer who was murdered on the same day as JFK. He was a friend of J.D. Tippit, and he owned a license plate for his car, a license plate that was seen on a car driven by Oswald near the scene of the Tippit killing. That alone is just too much of a coincidence to be credible as mere coincidence. That is, a friend of the murdered person. It's even difficult just to say this clearly, because it's not Carl Mather's car that Oswald was seen in. It was a car with Carl Mather's license plate on it that Oswald was seen in. But just that alone is too much to be mere coincidence. But Carl Mather also had worked on LBJ's airplane prior to the assassination, and the FBI played stupid investigating him, or investigating his license plate. That is, the Federal Bureau of Investigation did a shitty job, an intentionally shitty job, investigating this matter. And the reason is because it's obvious. If people understand what happened here, they will understand that the assassination had to be a conspiracy and an inside job. This matter is usually referred to as the Wes Wise incident. Not that he had anything to do with it, really, but he had to do with it becoming known, the incident becoming reported. Wes Wise was a media personality, a sportscaster for KRLD-TV. And Wise first appears in this FBI document of December 4th, 1963. Mr. Wes Wise, Sports Department, KRLD-TV, was interviewed, at which time he furnished the following information. Mr. Wise said on December 4th, 1963, he made a talk before the Oak Cliff Exchange Club at a luncheon meeting at the El Chico restaurant in Oak Cliff. Wise said although his specialty is sports, eventually the conversation at the meeting got around to the assassination of the president. Since persons present knew Wise was associated with KRLD-TV, the CBS outlet in Dallas. Wise continued that at the conclusion of the meeting, one of the guests came forward and reluctantly volunteered information that on November 22nd, 1963, just after news had been broadcast of the president's assassination, he observed a red 1957 Plymouth four-door sedan proceeding west at a rapid rate of speed on Davis Street in Oak Cliff. Wise said his source stated after a short period of time this car returned to the parking lot at the El Chico restaurant, where the car parked beside the restaurant and the occupant remained in the car. The source told Wise because of the mysterious maneuverings of this car, he walked close to the car and determined the license number was PP4537. The source told Wise at the luncheon meeting that that evening, while observing TV, a picture of Oswald was shown, and the source recognized Oswald as being the individual he observed in the red 1957 Plymouth on that afternoon. Wise said, as he recalled, this occurred on the same corner where Oswald reportedly left a taxicab following his trip from downtown Dallas. Wise said he had checked the license PP4537 through the License Bureau, and it was ascertained this license was issued to Carl Amos Mather, 4309 Colgate Lane, Garland, Texas. Wise stated at this time he desired not to furnish the identity of his source of information, but added if investigation indicated this individual might be involved in the Oswald case Wise would reveal the identity of the source. And I have noted here that Wise's witness said the car was a red, according to Wise, he said it was a red 1957 Plymouth four-door sedan. This is important to understanding the confusion involved with this matter, and I've also noted the license plate number there, about which there is no confusion. And this is a photograph of a red 1957 Plymouth. It is a car like this one that Wise says that his witness said he saw Oswald in the Chico restaurant parking lot. And on December 14th, the FBI talked to this witness himself, Mr. T.F. White, mechanic, Mac Pate's Garage, 114 West 7th Street, Dallas, Texas, was interviewed regarding a red 1957 Plymouth reportedly seen by him on the parking lot of the El Chico restaurant on the afternoon of November 22, 1963. Mr. White was advised Mr. Wes Wise, Sports Department, KRLD-TV, Dallas, had furnished information which Mr. Wise obtained from Mr. White reflecting the individual driving the red 1957 Plymouth was believed to be Lee Harvey Oswald. Mr. White stated he saw the red car at approximately 2 p.m. on the parking lot of the El Chico restaurant. He stated he now believes the car to have been a red 1961 Falcon, and he believed the automobile had 1963 Texas license PP 4537. White said he observed the man driving the car from the edge of his face, and when he saw television pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald on the night of November 22, 1963, he believed the man he saw at the El Chico restaurant parking lot was identical with Oswald. He said the man sat in the car for a short period of time, then left at a high rate of speed going west on Davis Street. Mr. White was advised that the license number furnished by him had been checked and ascertained to be assigned to the 1957 Plymouth automobile, which had been observed by an FBI agent and determined to be light blue over medium blue in color. It doesn't explain here where the FBI agent observed this automobile, but we'll get to that. Mr. White was also advised that Lee Harvey Oswald had been captured at the Texas Theater in Dallas at approximately 2 p.m. after having shot Dallas police officer J.D. Tippett at approximately 1:18 p.m. Mr. White was further advised witnesses have stated they observed Oswald fleeing from the scene of the Tippett shooting on foot, and he was observed by other witnesses to enter the Texas Theater shortly after the shooting. Mr. White said he thought he had obtained the correct license number on the car, and upon seeing Oswald on television on the night of November 22, 1963, he thought Oswald was possibly identical with the man he had seen driving the red automobile on the afternoon of November 22, 1963. The first thing we have to straighten out here is what kind of car the witness, Mr. White, said that he saw. According to the FBI report here, it says he now believes the car to have been a red 1961 Falcon, a 1961 Ford Falcon like this picture here. And if we compare the two cars being talked about, and let's just assume they're both red for convenience sake, comparing the two cars being talked about, a 1957 Plymouth and a 1961 Falcon, and keep in mind the witness here, Mr. White, is an automobile mechanic. Are we really supposed to believe that he wasn't sure which kind of car it was? I mean, of course, he knew the difference between a 57 Plymouth and a 61 Falcon. And I think it's pretty clear that White says he saw a Ford Falcon, and that he never said anything different than that, and that therefore we have a confusion here that must be cleared up. And I'm going to clear it up. And the confusion seems to stem from Wes Wise's investigation of the matter. In the Wes Wise interview with the FBI, he described the car in question as a red 1957 Plymouth. And also in that statement at the bottom, you can see it says, Wise said he had checked the license through the License Bureau, and it was ascertained that it belonged to Carl Amos Mather. Well, Carl Amos Mather owns, at this time, a 1957 Plymouth. It's blue, but that information apparently is not in the License Bureau information. So what Wes Wise got from the License Bureau was the name of the car owner and the kind of car it was. It was a 1957 Plymouth. So he told the FBI that his witness said it was a Plymouth, even though that's what the License Bureau told Wise. Obviously, I think, White, an automobile mechanic, never told Wise that it was a Plymouth. White must have known that it was a Falcon because the two cars are so different. But Wise recorded it in his own mind as a Plymouth because the License Bureau told him that. But he told the FBI, apparently, unless the FBI screwed this up intentionally, apparently he told the FBI that his witness, White, saw the 1957 Plymouth, and it was red, even though Carl Mather's Plymouth is blue, as the FBI already knows when they're interviewing White. Are you following this? No, the FBI never clarifies this at all. In fact, they pretend that it is impossible that the license plate could have been on a different car. They just assume it had to have been on the car that it was registered to. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, couldn't entertain the possibility that the license plate had been put on a different car. So even though the FBI here tries to make it look as though White changed his story about what kind of car it was, obviously White knew all along and said all along that it was a Ford Falcon, and the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, just couldn't figure that out. So the first point clarified here is that White saw Oswald, or someone he thought was Oswald, in a red 1961 Ford Falcon. And the Falcon had Carl Mather's Plymouth license plate on it. That's what all of this means. He didn't change his story. He never saw a Plymouth. He saw Oswald in a 61 Ford Falcon that had Carl Mather's license plate on it. And I don't believe this FBI crap about 2 p.m. either. Here it says, Mr. White stated he saw the red car at approximately 2 p.m. Well, I think this is just FBI bullshit to try to make it look as though Mr. White couldn't have seen Oswald in the car because by 2 p.m., Oswald had been arrested, so he couldn't be in a car seen by Mr. White. Wes Wise, according to the earlier FBI report, said just after news had been broadcast of the president's assassination that he observed the red car. So, and this isn't really clear. You can't pin down the time based on this either. But if you're talking about news of the shooting, and in retrospect you might say it was news of the president's assassination, I mean, this could be any time after 12:30 and before 2 o'clock. And now going to this HSCA document from 1977, where investigators went to the Pate garage and talked to Mr. Pate. We then proceeded to the Pate garage, located in the back of El Chico's on 7th Street. This is just a few blocks south of 1026 Beckley. Mr. Pate was extremely reluctant to talk to us. He indicated the entire thing was somewhat of an inside joke as far as the business community of Dallas is concerned, and that they all know, it's common knowledge that there's a Ruby Tippit-Oswald conspiracy, had been from the very beginning, compounded by the fact that several prospective witnesses met with untimely deaths. The combination of these circumstances prevented Mr. Pate from giving us much information in terms of detail. He did, however, recite the fact that his mechanic, Mr. White, died a natural death perhaps 3 years ago, who had been listening to the radio in the garage about 12:30 p.m. on the 22nd day of November 1963 from 12:30 till perhaps 1:15. The radio was nothing but news about the assassination, and involved in this was some description in terms of a lookout of a red automobile. It just so happened that a red Falcon stopped out front. A man, apparently the only occupant seated behind the wheel, had what appeared to be clean clothing from the cleaners hanging in the rear. His curiosity was aroused. He walked out there to take a better look at the car and did jot down the tag number down. A Texas tag number. The man drove away, crossing Beckley Avenue, which is at the corner of 7th Street, where the shop's located. Before the elderly mechanic returned, as he saw the car disappear at the corner of 7th and Beckley, he also noticed a used car lot on the corner had attracted the attention of two plain automobiles who were apparently being utilized by several FBI men armed with long guns, either shotguns or machine guns. They stopped at the corner, took a man out of one of the cars and put him on the ground and searched him. It developed that it was the owner of the lot, but he did have a strong resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald. This was interesting in view of the fact that it was about perhaps 12:45 or maybe 12:50, but definitely before 1 o'clock, at least 15 minutes before the Tippit shooting. So I think this means that the FBI 2 o'clock time is bullshit, as I suspected, that the FBI wants it to look as though this could not be Oswald that White saw, and that actually White saw this guy, Oswald presumably, in this car before the Tippit shooting, or perhaps right around the time of the Tippit shooting. So this FBI 2 o'clock time is bullshit. So to further clarify the situation, White saw Oswald in a 1961 red Ford Falcon with Carl Mather's license plate on it before Oswald had been arrested. So it really could have been Oswald, and this is right down the street from the 10th and Patton site where the shooting occurred that supposedly was the shooting of J.D. Tippit. Now, the Mather family were friends of the Tippit family, and both of them lived in the same neighborhood until November of 1961, when both of them moved out of that neighborhood. But by the time of Tippit's murder, they were no longer neighbors. They were still friends, but they didn't live near each other anymore. And Mather's license plate was on a car driven by the guy the official story tells us murdered Tippit, which is kind of interesting. Since the Mather license plate had been seen on a car driven by Oswald, the FBI had to go visit the Mathers, and this is a document produced as a result of that visit. Special Agent Charles T. Brown, Jr. observed a 1957 Plymouth four-door automobile parked in the driveway at 4309 Colgate Street, Garland, Texas, which car had 1963 Texas license PP 4537. It was observed that this car is a light blue over medium blue color. So this has the same plate number that T.F. White saw on the car that he saw Oswald in, but it's not the same model car that he saw Oswald in. So the license plate on the Mather car was seen on a car driven by Oswald, but now it's on a 1957 Plymouth. Mrs. Mather stated on November 22, 1963, her husband left his work at Collins Radio Company in Richardson, Texas, at approximately 2 or 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon, at which time he came to their home at 4309 Colgate Street, Garland, Texas. Mrs. Mather stated she and her husband were friends of former Dallas policeman J.D. Tippit, who was shot on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963. Mrs. Mather said shortly after her husband arrived home, they took their two children with them in their 1954 Ford station wagon, at which time they proceeded to Dallas, Texas, to the Tippett home to express their condolences to Mrs. Tippett and to assist her in any way possible. Mrs. Mather said she and her husband and the children remained at the Tippett home together until around 5 p.m. They arrived at the Tippett home at approximately 3:30 p.m. that afternoon. Around 5 p.m., Mr. Mather left the Tippett home with the two Mather children and drove to the Mather home in Garland, where he fed the two children and put them to bed. Notice how it is carefully avoided to say where the car with the license plate in question was during the day. Her husband was at work at Collins Radio with some car, but we're not told which car. So the car in question, or the license plate in question, is avoided here by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That is, they don't ask Mrs. Mather where the car with the license plate in question was at the time that it was supposedly seen by the mechanic at the El Chico restaurant. They don't ask the very question that needs to be asked. Where was that car? And it is not said where that car was. Mrs. Mather was questioned as to knowledge of her husband or anyone else driving a red late model automobile in the vicinity of the El Chico restaurant on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, at which time Mrs. Mather stated she was at a loss to understand any connection between the red automobile reportedly bearing Texas license PP 4537 and her family. Mrs. Mather said as best she could recall, her husband was at the Tippett home constantly on the afternoon of November 22nd, 1963, following their arrival there at about 3:30 p.m. So they're asking about a red car that she claims to have no knowledge of, and they say that they were at the Tippett home until 3:30 p.m. Well, they arrived there at 3:30 p.m., which is, of course, after the car had been spotted with their license plate number on it, and they arrived there in a different car, in their station wagon. So this is just lame brain investigation by professional investigators. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, cannot seem to comprehend the possibility that the license plate might have been taken off the Mather car and put on another car, and therefore they have to ask where the Mather car with that license plate was, at the time that this other car was seen, and before that time, because what is very strongly implied here is that somebody took the Mather license plate off of the Mather car and put it on a red Ford Falcon. That's obviously what is implied by the evidence, but the FBI seems to have no clue. The Federal Bureau of Investigation. And as I wrote on my graphic here, the obvious question is not addressed by Special Agent Charlie Brown. That's the name of the FBI agent here. Where was the car and its license plate between 12:30 and 2 on 11/22/63? This report does not say whether the car was at Collins Radio or at the home or anywhere else. And they never bothered to question the husband. Now, it seems what we're supposed to probably think here is that the husband took this car to work that day, and that probably the wife had the station wagon because she has the children, and not necessarily, but probably the husband took the car with that license plate to work. So what the FBI should do, what they need to do, is talk to the husband and ask him where his car was at the time that, between the assassination and the time that Oswald was seen driving a car with his license plate on it. But they never bothered. They visit the Mather home during business hours, so the husband, of course, is at work, and they never go to question Mather at work. So the Federal Bureau of Investigation isn't really investigating this. And that's as suspicious as anything else here, because this is clear. This is easy, fundamental stuff. You want to find out where that license plate was, and the FBI can't figure it out. Also, when the FBI visits Mrs. Mather here, the car in question, the Plymouth, is in the driveway, and apparently the station wagon is with the husband at work. That seems to be counterintuitive. One would think that the husband would leave the station wagon with the wife during the day. It's not a law, it's not necessarily so, but it looks to me like probably the Mathers switched their routine for their FBI interview just to mess things up a little bit so that it's not as clear as it's still clear. I mean, you have to find out where the Plymouth was between the assassination and the Tippit shooting. You have to find that out, or the time Oswald was arrested. But the FBI just can't think of that. Now, this addresses the question of which car was where at the Mather home on the day of the assassination. As on top here is part of the FBI report I just went over, the FBI report from 1963. And on the bottom here is part of the HSCA report of an interview with the Mathers. And here it says, she pointed out her tags on the old Ford station wagon. She's talking of let me read the whole thing. Asked to describe the FBI's efforts, Barbara, sounds like the HSCA realizes the FBI's efforts were a little lacking here. Asked to describe the FBI's efforts, Barbara said, one day an agent came to the house. This was at 4309 Colgate Lane, the Garland address they moved from. They moved from 218 Glenfield in 1161. Well, it's the address they moved to in 1161. Anyway, and he inquired about their tags. Oh, we don't get that in the report. She pointed out her tags on the old Ford station wagon and advised Carl had the 57 Plymouth at work. So she says the opposite of what the FBI report said in 1963. She says that the station wagon was in the driveway when the FBI came to question her, and that Carl Mather had the other car, the Plymouth, at work, which is what I said would be the expected situation. That is, the station wagon would stay home with the wife and kids. And in 1978, she says that is the way it was in 1963 when the FBI agent came. But the FBI report says that the Plymouth was in the driveway, not the station wagon. So something funny is going on here. Either she's misremembering, which I think is probably not the case. I think probably the FBI in 1963 lied about which car was in the driveway. They wanted to make it look as though the Plymouth, probably on the day of the assassination, was at the Mather home, making it since the license plate on the Plymouth is what has to have been accessed in order to put it on the Ford Falcon, it sounds like the FBI doesn't want us to realize that the Plymouth with the license plate was at Collins Radio on the day of the assassination. But it's never clearly stated that way. The only clear statement we have comes from 1978, when the wife, Mrs. Mather, says unequivocally there that the Plymouth was at work at Collins Radio. The Plymouth with the license plate in question was at Collins Radio. Prior to the assassination, Oswald had been spotted in Irving, Texas, visiting a furniture store and a gun shop. These are very credible sightings of Oswald. Of course, the shills and idiots will argue that that wasn't Oswald. The poor dears. But I'm not going to address their concerns in this video. I'm just going to deal with this document here. FBI document of December 16th, 1963, interview with Mrs. Edith Whitworth, who had a home address, advised that around November 6th, 7th, or 8th, 1963, she was unable to definitely establish the date in her mind. An individual whom she later knew was Lee Harvey Oswald from his photograph had come into the furniture mart where she was working. At the time Oswald came into the store, there was a gun repair sign on the front of the building which had been left there by the previous occupant. Oswald was directed to a gun repair shop approximately 1.5 blocks away from the furniture mart. While in the store, Mrs. Whitworth stated that Oswald inquired as to both a living room and dining room set, stating that he would need both in the near future. While in the store, his wife, carrying a small baby and leading a small girl, came in and observed Oswald's activities, but never made any statement or said anything. When she came in, Oswald told Mrs. Whitworth that his youngest child had been born on October 20th, 1963, and Mrs. Whitworth recalled this date as being the approximate time that a grandchild of hers had been born. Oswald remained in the furniture mart approximately 15 minutes, but despite the conversation concerning the infant child, no attempt was made by Mrs. Oswald to exhibit the baby, nor did she permit anyone to look at the child. On leaving the furniture mart, second-hand furniture store, the Oswalds made a U-turn and left driving against the traffic on East Irving Boulevard in the direction of the gun repair shop in either a 1956 or 1957 two-tone blue and white Ford or Plymouth. And this is the point. A 1956 or 1957 two-tone blue and white Ford or Plymouth. Now, she doesn't remember exactly, precisely what car it was, but what she says here could very well be Carl Mather's Plymouth, which was, according to the FBI report I've read, a two-tone blue and white Plymouth, 1957. So, Oswald had been sighted in what could very well have been Carl Mather's car about 2 weeks prior to the assassination. And on the day of the assassination, Oswald was sighted in a different car with that same car's license plate. The implication being that Oswald has some sort of a relationship with the Mathers or with Carl Mather, and that he uses Carl Mather's car, and that on the day of the assassination, for some reason, he used Carl Mather's license plate without the car. And around the same time that he had been seen by Mrs. Wentworth at the furniture store in Oak Cliff, Oswald had told Mary Bledsoe, who was his landlady for a week, that he is attempting to obtain work at Texas Instruments and Collins Radio. So it looks to me like Oswald is driving Carl Mather's car at this time, and also interested in getting a job where Carl Mather works, at Collins Radio. And it's also interesting that Texas Instruments is mentioned here as a place he is looking for work at. And I find that interesting because perennial assassination clown Ed Hoffman, you remember him, the deaf and mute guy, he works at Texas Instruments. Hoffman first appears as a witness in the records in 1967, this 1967 document. For the 1963 assassination, this is his first appearance, and in this document it says that he works for Texas Instruments. And in this HSCA document from the 1970s, Hoffman is quoted as saying that on the day of the assassination, he was driving a 1962 Ford Falcon, though we are not told what color it was. And in this graphic, I've put a 1961 Ford Falcon next to a 1962 Ford Falcon. And I think even a mechanic back in 1963 might have mistaken a 1962 Falcon for a 1961 Falcon. So I think that perennial clown Ed Hoffman, who was certainly a disinformation agent, though there are idiots and chills who will disagree with my assessment of him, but I have no doubts he was a clown who was putting out disinformation. He probably was involved with the assassination plot on the day that it happened. Not that he had anything to do with shooting Kennedy, but his car was being used in Oak Cliff, presumably by Oswald. Now, this is a photo of Ed Hoffman in that time period, and perhaps it's possible that he was driving that car in Oak Cliff, and that the mechanic White thought that he looked like Oswald. I don't know about that, but I think probably these perennial clowns actually were involved in some way, and part of their payment is that they get to be perennial clowns who make money here and there in the years following the assassination. And I think Ed Hoffman was probably such a clown, and that his car was being used in Oak Cliff, and that's the car that had Carl Mather's license plate on it. And I think probably Oswald was driving it. And the mechanic White wasn't the only person to see a red Ford in this area. At the end of Domingo Benavides' Warren Commission testimony, he started adding things. And one of the things he added was the sighting of a red Ford. I think there was another car that was in front of me, a red Ford, I believe. I didn't know the man, but I guess he was about 25 or 30, and he pulled over. I didn't never see him get out of his car, but when he heard the scare, I guess he was about 6 cars from them, and he pulled over, and I don't know if he came back there or not. So, in Domingo Benavides speak, this means that he saw a red car at the scene of the shooting on 10th Street, supposedly the shooting of Tippit on 10th Street. There was a red Ford there, too, and just down the street from the shooting on 10th Street, we have Lee Harvey Oswald spotted in a red Ford. Exactly what this means, I don't know. Whether it was Oswald driving this car while the shooting was going on 10th Street, or maybe it was Ed Hoffman. I don't know. But I think probably it's the same car. Of course, the shills and the idiots want us to think that the person driving this red car was fake-ass witness Jack Tatum. But fake-ass witness Jack Tatum was a fake-ass witness. He was not there. Perhaps he was wheeled out to explain this other car, because his story kind of fits nicely with this other car, but he's a fake-ass witness, and he was not there. And I don't need to get into the details of that here. I've covered that before. And Jack Tatum was not there. He was a fake witness. He was a disinformation witness. And probably one of the reasons they wanted to use Tatum was to explain this red Ford mentioned by Benavides. Now I'm going to have to review the William Scoggins affidavit to the Secret Service. William Scoggins was a witness to the apparent Tippit shooting on 10th Street. He was parked in his cab near the intersection of 10th and Patton, and he and Ted Calloway had the gun, the officer's gun. The officer who had apparently been shot on 10th Street had a gun, and Ted Calloway took that gun, and he went to Scoggins, and he had Scoggins drive him away from the scene with that gun. And everybody, well, let me read this here. I saw a man using the radio in the police cruiser, and that would be Ted Calloway, and a few seconds later he appeared on the street with a gun in his hand and said to me, "Let's go hunt him." Now, by him, they mean the shooting suspect, the person they had seen leave the scene of the shooting with a gun. We got in my cab and left. We proceeded north on Patton and possibly turned west on 10th. We cruised in an area north of 10th Street looking for the man I had seen, but we did not see him. When we left the intersection of 10th and Patton, we did not go to Patton and Jefferson, but went in a northerly direction, which will be opposite from the intersection of Patton and Jefferson. Now, the reason he's stressing that they went opposite of the direction of Patton and Jefferson is that the suspect went in the direction of Patton and Jefferson. So what he's telling the Secret Service here, without being absolutely explicit, but being clear, what he's telling the Secret Service here is that Ted Calloway and he, at the direction of Ted Calloway, in order to follow the suspect, to find the suspect, went in the opposite direction that the suspect went in. That is, supposedly they were going to find the suspect, but they went in the opposite direction. They didn't go in the direction the suspect went in. So instead of pursuing the suspect, Scoggins says they went north. We went in a northerly direction, and a northerly direction from the shooting on 10th Street and a little west, and he does mention possibly going west, is right to where Oswald was spotted in the red Ford Falcon at the El Chico restaurant. Well, I think Scoggins was a hired witness, but didn't know what was going on, and didn't know that Ted Calloway was doing what he was supposed to be doing according to the conspiracy. And I think Scoggins wanted to tell the Secret Service, without being too explicit, that they didn't follow the suspect. They went north. And that's why we have that statement from Scoggins. And it's never clarified later what he meant by that. Calloway's story adjusted to make it seem as though they might match, the stories might match. Calloway originally had said they just went south in the direction the suspect went. But what Scoggins says is that they went in the direction of where Oswald was parked in the Ford Falcon. And they went in that direction with the gun that the police officer had on 10th Street. So I think probably they're taking this gun to the Ford Falcon and giving it to Oswald or whoever's driving it. That is, that the gun on 10th Street that the police officer had was being switched with another gun. And Calloway and Scoggins did come back to the scene with a gun, so I think they switched the gun that had been used on 10th Street, or the gun that the officer had on 10th Street, with some other gun. Now, this video isn't about that. This is about Carl Mather and his car, so I don't think I'll go off any further in that direction. Now, getting back to Carl Mather, the first time that anybody ever talked to him, any of the authorities talked to him about the assassination and made a record of it, was in 1978. The House Select Committee on Assassinations interviewed him, and they wrote this report. And I'm going to read that. Have known the J.D. Tippit family since they were neighbors in 1958 on the 1900 to 2000 block of Glenfield in Dallas. Before the Mathers moved to Garland, Texas, in November of 1961, they had become good friends with the Tippits. Each family had 3 children, and the ages were similar. Carl and Barbara would double date on occasion, usually visiting a family-type club involving an inexpensive evening. Never any trouble between anyone in either family, nor were they aware of any of the Tippits had with anyone else, any trouble they had with anyone else. Their impression of J.D. was that of a hard-working man determined to provide for his family in spite of the lack of potential for advancement. Knew he took various odd jobs to augment his income and seemed to spend what little free time he had with his family. Marie helped out by babysitting for 5 to 7 children on somewhat of a regular basis. On occasion, the Mather kids would be included. Hard put to recall other Tippit friends or associates in the neighborhood. They do recall Frank and Angie living next door to J.D. and Marie, but can't recall their surname. did recall J.D. had a little brown Ford and later traded it in on a new Falcon station wagon, and it was blue. Wes Wise, the ex-mayor, was a sports announcer at that time, and it seems he had a speaking engagement at some restaurant in Dallas a short time after the assassination. He, Wise, was told by a man who had in his employee a mechanic who was also a part-time deputy of some nature, that this employee, on the day of the assassination, had observed a suspicious red Ford car spinning its wheels and throwing gravel behind a parked bus. The mechanic utilized his deputy training and jotted down the tag number, and now this man was giving it to Wes Wise. So apparently the mechanic, T.F. White, and we are not told this anywhere else, was also a part-time deputy. So he had some kind of law enforcement experience, and that's why he wrote down the license plate number. So Wes Wise was calling him, advising him of these developments, and inviting him to dinner, inasmuch as there was another person from the news media in New York, now in Dallas, with Wise to do documentary on the entire assassination and any interesting asides. So this is referring to Wes Wise wanting to interview Carl Mather. He and his wife met Wise and Dane Bartel from the New York Wire Service in the old Warsaw restaurant located in Oak Lawn. Dinner and discussion of these curious events didn't seem to accomplish much, as they came away without understanding how that mechanic could have written down the tag listed to Carl's 57 blue Plymouth. Barbara was driving an old Ford station wagon, early 50s, white over faded blue at the time. So here it's stated, apparently by Barbara or Carl Mather, that the wife drove the station wagon and that Carl Mather drove the Plymouth. And the FBI tried to imply that it was the other way around without actually saying so. Several months later, saw the documentary on TV with her name listed on credits, but no mention of the tag number episode. Although they don't recall the exact date of this dinner, it was so long after the incident, the new tags had since been issued and the old ones discarded. Moreover, it hadn't impressed him as being important enough to ask someone to check for him. After all, the FBI had apparently dropped the matter. Asked to describe the FBI's efforts, Barbara said one day an agent came to the house. This was at 4309 Colgate Lane, the Garland address they had moved from, 2018 Glenfield, in 1161. And he inquired about their tags. She pointed out her tags on the old Ford station wagon and advised Carl had the 57 Plymouth at work. No, they never owned a red auto of any type. Again, she doesn't recall the date, but it was when the newer tags were in effect anyway. She didn't hear from the agent again, and Carl didn't hear at all. What seemed like 6 weeks later, a second agent came to the same house and interviewed Barbara, again at home alone during the day, and he too was interested in the fact that a tag listed to Carl was observed on a different type of vehicle in a different part of town. So apparently the FBI did notice that the tag was on a different vehicle, even though they didn't make it clear in their report. When she indicated the first agent didn't understand it either, he seemed surprised another agent had been ahead of him. This seemed to cause his interest in the matter to wane, and he left. Like the first agent, he didn't return, nor did he interview Carl. Not that Carl isn't used to being interviewed by government agents. He has a security clearance, and has had since he started traveling with his company. He's been with them for 21 years now, has traveled overseas. His specific function deals with the installation of special electronic gear in aircraft. One such assignment caused him to be quartered in Brandywine, Maryland, as he worked for some period of time at Andrews Air Force Base, working on Air Force Two, Vice President Johnson's plane at the time. Now, I have seen reference to Carl Mather working with the CIA installing communications equipment. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't seen anything like that in the JFK assassination evidence. And I base my videos on the JFK assassination evidence unless I see something else that looks important to me. And I haven't seen anything independently confirming that he had any kind of a relationship with the CIA. But I think this is pretty good. He has security clearance, and he's worked on Air Force Two, Vice President Lyndon Johnson's plane. And of course, Johnson is the guy who became president when JFK was assassinated. Quite a coincidence. He adds he does recall the date of 11/22/63. He worked all day at the Richardson, Texas Collins radio shop. Although the then boss, J.A. Pickford, has since retired, he thinks he's still in the area. They did actually talk to Pickford, and Pickford could not specifically remember much of anything. So I won't go over that here. So Carl Mather was a friend of J.D. Tippit, and he owned a license plate on a car driven by Oswald near the site of the alleged Tippit shooting, or the alleged site of the Tippit shooting. He had worked on LBJ's airplane, and the FBI played stupid investigating him. And my conclusion here, Oswald used Mather's Plymouth to visit the furniture store and gun shop, and he probably used it for other things, too, that we don't know about. And he used the Plymouth's license plate on the Ford Falcon on the day of the assassination. And I think there's probably a Harvey and Lee angle here, but I don't want to make this more complicated and have to defend a Harvey and Lee scenario when I don't really know about that. I think, as I have said before, that the guy I call Harvey was actually married to Marina, so I think it would make sense that he's the one driving the car at the furniture store, and it might be Harvey and Lee were involved in Oak Cliff, and that one of them was on foot for the shooting on Oak Cliff, and the other one was in this car. But I don't really know about the Harvey and Lee angle here, but I think there's plenty of room for a Harvey and Lee in this story.